All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. Obviously, putting the last vestiges of Week 3 behind us and preparing for the big time prime time matchup Week 4 for the Dallas Cowboys. A lot of news to get into, but as we always like to on this channel, get things started with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. I got a little bit of an eye chart for you guys here, just something to break down and discuss. And we're going to talk about offensive success when it comes to offensive tackles, specifically when they're left on an island. And we know a lot of offensive tackles. It's a lot of schemes, it's a lot of structure, depending on your offense works, is how much help you give tackles. Obviously, game plans play a role into it, right? If you use a lot of tight ends, for example, you'll get tackles just naturally. You'll have a lot of help because you got a guy right there, right next to you. But I think this is just a good data point. And here, this is sort of a pro Tyler Guyton graphic, because you can see Guyton right there, smack dab, right about in the middle of the screen in terms of island pass blocking rate. That's the x-axis. That's how often you are on an island. And your pass block win rate, that's the y-axis. You can see Guyton right there, kind of smack dab in the middle, right? The Cowboys have not been giving him any sort of extra help in terms of outside the norm. And he's been doing about average, maybe a little bit below average, but considering where the Cowboys, or who the Cowboys have played, in a lot of these matchups, he's done passable. And again, especially considering how much he struggled his rookie year. He's definitely has a long way to go. He's improved significantly as a run blocker. He's really showed up as a physical force there, but his pass protection has improved, and that's a good sign for the Cowboys. Now, as much as this is a pro Guyton graphic, it's a sort of anti-Terrence Steele graphic, because you can see Terrence Steele not too far removed from where Guyton is on the image there. You can see he's actually a little down and to the left. But considering Terrence Steele is a veteran and much more costly, his pass protection performance has not been good at all. I think that's what the film has showed. That's what the broadcast footage has showed, which, by the way, is always something you're looking for in data, right? We watch the games, we watch the film, and that's sort of the observation element of, the old school scientific method. And then the data is sort of the test. Does the data match what our eyes showed? And our eyes showed getting better, Steele kind of struggling in pass pro. And look, that's what the data is saying. And I think that's going to be a real issue with the Cowboys going forward. Have to make some interesting decisions. There's been some rumblings about Nate Thomas getting some playing time potentially at one of the tackles. Terrence Steele's name has been floated around. I think because Terrence Steele is such a good run blocker, and he's very athletic in terms of getting in the run blocking game, I don't think they get rid of him yet, but I do think he's getting on thinner and thinner ice with his pass protection performance, because it has not been good through the first 2 weeks of the season. Guyton, on the other hand, trending in the right direction. And again, for a year two guy that was, coming out of college, he was one of these guys that was, his ceiling was incredibly high, but he was a developmental guy. He was a raw prospect for sure, drafted in the latter part of the first round to kind of be the eventual replacement to Tyron Smith, move into that kind of elite tackle. And look, rookie year with some injuries, some ups and downs, to put it mildly. Year two, doing good in the run game and improving in the pass protection game. Long way to go for Guyton, but right now I think the trend is his friend. He's doing some good things. All right, let's get into the news here. This first report is courtesy of John Machota over at The Athletic, great reporter. He said Cowboys owner Jerry Jones on 105.3 The Fan said he expects defensive end Jadeveon Clowney to play Sunday against the Packers. I think there's one really important takeaway from this is how definitive Jones is. And we'll get to an example of the opposite in a little bit. But Jerry Jones, normally in interviews and discussions, he's very sort of wishy-washy, right? He'll say, he talked about the other day about we might trade some picks this season, we might trade picks after the season, we got cap space, what are we going to do with those picks? We'll see. We don't know. Last year when it was talking about Mike McCarthy and the coaching head coach, what are you going to do with Mike McCarthy? Well, we might bring him back, we might not. We love Mike McCarthy, but we'll have to, see how things go, right? Very, very wishy-washy in terms of making any changes. He's always a very big I love our guys, right? That's sort of his mentality. I think, not in a bad way. I think you want the owner of your team to avoid being publicly critical of the actual players and coaches while they're playing the games, right? You talk about a massive media headline if Jerry Jones or any owner came out and said, yeah, our players suck, right? That would not go over well at all. But this is basically pretty strong from Jerry Jones. Says, no, listen, I expect him to play, right? And this isn't, I expect him to dress. This is, I expect him to play and play significantly. This is as big a shot as we're going to see from Jerry Jones publicly, and I don't think he makes this, for a guy who's known for saying things a little off the cuff, I don't think he makes this without, some conversations and discussions with Schottenheimer and the coaching staff and the plans that are coming. I think Jadeveon Clowney obviously will play, and I think he'll play not an insignificant amount of snaps. But I think this is a direct response, or direct, I'll say not response, but it goes with what Schottenheimer said yesterday about, listen, we're going to make some massive changes on defense. Personnel changes, maybe scheme changes for sure. In terms of communication changes, we got to mix some things up. We got to change how we do our meeting structure. Everything's up for debate for this defense, because it has obviously been, in terms of pass defense, horrible so far this season. Right now, they've got the worst pass defense in yards per game. I think 31st in surrendering big plays, right? One of the worst in points allowed. Bottom 5 in both interceptions and sacks, right? It's third down defense is the worst in football, right? So it's one of those things where they're either the worst in football in terms of pass defense or pretty darn close, right? So again, we're not talking about a defense that we can just wait and see. No, you need a little urgency here, and that's what we're seeing. I think from the Cowboys. I think this is the first big lineup change. I don't expect Jadeveon Clowney to start. I expect him to play a lot of snaps. I think we're going to see a guy get benched. I don't think it's going to be Houston. I don't think they're going to bench Ezraku, right? He's a young player. I don't think they're going to bench Sam Williams either. I think he's a younger player that the Cowboys like. He's coming off the injury, right? That's one thing with Williams. He did have a major injury last year. He was never a starter, never got a whole lot of playing time. Let's give it a few more reps. And Marshawn Kneeland, while he hasn't been great in terms of the pass rush, he's actually been pretty bad. He's been really good in terms of run defense, and he's been a high motor guy, which kind of the expectation was coming out of college, right? He's not a speed pass rusher defensive end kind of force. That's never what he really was supposed to be, never really what he was projected to be, but he's done well against the run. He's just a good hustle effort guy who seems to be really trying to do his job and good fundamental defensive end. So I don't see him getting benched or losing a lot of reps anytime soon. So to me, it's Dante Fowler. And I think this is the big move right here. I think this is the decision of Fowler. I think he's going to go the way of, the Mozzie Smiths or any other veteran that had a high expectations and then kind of gets benched or maybe even doesn't dress anymore, maybe even gets cut. We'll have to wait and see. Because I think they expected a lot out of Fowler. And not without reason, right? Fowler had been not a superstar, but very productive. Had won a lot of opportunities in the pass rush game. Gotten some pressures, gotten some sacks for the past couple seasons, and he's been completely ineffective for the Dallas Cowboys over the first 3 games of the season in terms of productivity. Listen, it's one of those things for a backup or rotational guy to, let me go into the advanced analytics or a rookie or something like that to see how they're doing. If you're a starting defensive end, a veteran defensive end, you got to be productive. We better see tackles for losses. We better see sacks. We better see quarterback hits. We better be something, right? I can't rely on PFF grades that say, oh, you're actually not too terrible to tell me how good you are. No, if you're a starting defensive end, a veteran defensive end, there better darn well be production, and there hasn't been. And I think this is the first shoe to drop. I think the fact that Jerry Jones is coming out publicly, and saying this explicitly, which again, he's a very wishy-washy guy. He's a very I love our guys kind of owner. That's what he's always been. He's never been about indicating anything publicly that someone's going to get benched, traded, or cut, or a coach is going to get fired or anything like that. The fact that he came out and said, no, Jadeveon Clowney, he'll play. He's going to play, guaranteed. I think is probably the end or seems close to the end for Dante Fowler. That's my guess. His Cowboys career up to this point. And I think this is just the first shoe to drop defensively. I think we're going to see a lot more, these kind of reports over the coming days and weeks as the Cowboys try and figure something out for this Cowboys defense. All right, this next report, courtesy of a Packers reporter, I thought it was very interesting. He says, teams have accomplished little throwing at the Packers quarterbacks this year. Against Nixon, Valentine Hobbs through 3 games, 10 completions on 26 targets for 92 yards. That's it. It's one of those things where people talk about the CeeDee Lamb injury, and obviously that's a big blow and a big hit. But one of the things that can happen is that when you have a star player, like a star receiver, for example, and the Packers have been playing well at quarter, and they've obviously got a really good pass rush, is sometimes you try and play into your strengths, and it ends up playing into the opposition's strengths as well. I'm very interested to see what happens against Sunday when it comes from an offensive game plan perspective, because the best way to play the Packers, honestly, is to pound them physically and short throw, dink and dunk it. Ferguson catching 13 passes for 85 yards isn't terrible, right? Running the football for 3, 4, 5 yards a pop, isn't terrible by any means. And I think that's what we're going to see a lot from Dallas. And I think one of the reasons why the CeeDee Lamb injury, if you listen to people around Dallas, well, they're obviously disappointed and it's a big setback. They're not quite as disappointed when it comes to this week, and at least what they're saying publicly, because I think they felt that trying to feed CeeDee Lamb and take advantage of his great playmaking ability actually is what the Packers want you to do. They want you to try and sit in the pocket, stand in the pocket, and deliver it deep down the field to a secondary that's playing good. They've got good safety play with Xavier McKinney and a really good pass rush. That's kind of how they want to play. It's one of the reasons why I think the Lions had some issues. It's one of the reasons why I think the Commanders have some issues, right? Those guys, if you're the Commanders, Terry McLaurin, right? Deebo Samuel, right? A couple other big play receivers. Obviously, the Lions have a lot of big play receivers. You look at Tesla, the rookie, Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown can do it all, right? Sam Laporta can attack vertically when the opportunities are there as well, right? When you're those teams, they want to step in the pocket and hang in there and just throw it deep down the field, just let it rip. And that's what the Packers want you to do. Now, with CeeDee Lamb, the Cowboys are going to have one less person they can do that with, right? Obviously, Turpin may have his moments, and obviously Pickens will have a few opportunities, but it's not going to be nearly as featured as much as you would expect with in terms of the game plan against Green Bay that would have normally been the case have had CeeDee Lamb been playing. And I think that's going to be very interesting to see what the Cowboys adjust going forward. And this is where it's sort of the old Patrick Ewing effect, right? The Ewing effect, which was credited to Bill Simmons, the famed sports writer, who Ewing obviously the all-star Hall of Fame basketball player for the New York Knicks in the 1990s, in the 80s and 90s. When he went down one year and the Knicks suddenly got a whole lot better, right? It was one of those things like, how does that happen? How do you be good with a superstar, and then the superstar gets hurt and your team plays better? Well, it's because now you can not worry about force feeding him. You can play as a team. You can have actual game plans and strategies. Look, I don't know. I'm not saying the Cowboys are better with CeeDee Lamb. They're not. But it'd be very interesting to see, in my opinion, how Schottenheimer and Clayton Adams come up with a game plan going forward over these next few weeks. It's a great opportunity for Schottenheimer. It's a great opportunity for George Pickens, obviously, to see what he can do. But it's a good opportunity for this Cowboys offensive coaching staff. I want to see what they come up with in terms of creativity. Now, are they going to be nearly as explosive, or are they going to put nearly as points as they possibly could have with CeeDee Lamb? Absolutely not. But they got a chance here to come up with some good game plans. I'm excited to see what they come up with, starting, of course, Sunday night. All right, this next report is courtesy of Joseph Hoyt. Jerry Jones called the poor defense of late a, quote, perfect storm. A zone defense is a safe defense. It allows, if played right, should allow shorter gains, but not big plays. You got to be able to stop the explosive plays. The Cowboys are 31st in yards per play allowed. Well, there's a couple things to unpack here. One, the Cowboys being 31st in yards per play allowed is absolutely hilarious to me, because the fact that there's a team worse than Dallas is just comical, right? Because this has been just a disastrous big play defense over the past 2 weeks. And look, they weren't perfect in week one either. They gave up a bomb to Dodson, and I think they gave up like a 20-25 yard run as well. So again, they gave up two really splash plays in week one, which is sort of like you live with that, but that's sort of like not ideal. And in the last 2 weeks, they've just given up nothing but splash play after splash play after splash play. They've been horrible in that regard. And yet they're still in 31st in the NFL right now. So I mean, it just speaks to again, early seasons. A lot of times you get this September football, October football. There's a lot of bad football, and look, it's just going to be reality. There's going to be a lot of teams that are really struggling. One of the things that's funny is that whoever the 32nd team is, I didn't look it up. I really don't care. You got to love the fact that if you're that team, that the Dallas Cowboys exist, because no one's talking about you, and you're the worst, and everyone's talking about Dallas, who's actually technically a little bit better than you. But anyway, when you talk about what Jerry Jones is saying here, yeah, he's 100% correct. And again, this is something else. Again, this is the second time now where Jerry Jones has highlighted something. He's a very, like I said, very positive positive on the coaches all the time. He's like, hey, listen, and we'll get to a story just like that in a second. I'm not making that up. We all know this. He's not a guy that'll sit there and say, hey, our players stink. Right after the terrible loss to Chicago, where they looked absolutely awful, he's like, yeah, I think we're still a playoff team. Like, that's who Jerry Jones is, right? That's just, he's always an optimist. He always loves his guys on the team, loves the coaches on a team, loves the staff. He loves everything about the team, at least publicly. But this is the second time now in 24 hours he's saying, listen, what's going on, right? We got some flaws here. We've got to be able to stop some of these things. And I don't think this is in a vacuum. We saw Schottenheimer say different things, but in a similar vein. And I think we're seeing alignment here across the Cowboys organization. I think there's a combination of both a personnel attack. That's with Clowney getting more playing time. I think Fowler's time is probably done. That's my guess, or at least a lot of it. And I think we're also seeing a coaching staff kind of rib right here, or at least a coaching strategy kind of rib right here in terms of what the Cowboys are calling. And I think that's very important to highlight as we get into the game week and see things happen or not happen. And of course, what happens over the coming weeks and months for the Cowboys defensively, because this is unusual for Jerry Jones to come out and say, multiple things that aren't just, hey, we got great guys, we just got to play better, right? That's usually the Jerry Jones statement. Like, listen, we've got a talented team, we got great players, they just got to, if they do their job, we'll be fine. And that's just what he's saying. Listen, they're not doing it. Like, we're supposed to not be doing this, and we're supposed to not be giving up big plays, guys, and we're giving up big plays. What the heck is going on, right? This is from Jerry Jones. This is a pretty big statement. All right, this is another chart here I just want to highlight here just because I think it's interesting. I know we usually start with the stat of the day, but I'm going to throw a second one in here. So on the x-axis, you've got you got pass blocking PFF grade, right, on the right, and then you got ESPN's pass blocking win rate on the y-axis, right? So what's interesting is you see the Cowboys. They're one of the top pass blocking teams in terms of win rate, which is an ESPN statistic, but they're one of the worst pass blocking teams per PFF's grade. And so, which one is right? And the answer is, I don't know. But I think if you look at what the correlation between the PFF grade and the ESPN's win rate grade in terms of pass blocking, only one team's on that line. You see that diagonal line running right through the middle? That's sort of like the graphing of the regression line for anyone who knows statistics. The Packers are only a team on that line, and most teams aren't even close to that, right? You see the Colts way off base, the Broncos way off base. You look at, a lot of teams that are way off the line. I don't know which metric to think is better, PFF grade or win rate. I do think it's one of these things where at a certain point, because of PFF getting quoted all the time and cited all the time, I think we need to see more analytics entities, whether it's ESPN or whatever, to sit there and put up their own evaluation and grade or evaluate performances, because I don't think PFF can evaluate these guys. This is too inconsistent. And we've seen games where, for example, Tyler Smith against the Bears had a really nice game, but he graded out very poorly. And you're like, what the heck is going on here? How did you grade this out? And PFF, they keep it kind of a black box, right? They kind of allude to some things one way or the other, but they don't specifically say. Because, at least win rate, you can sit there and say, okay, you're evaluating whether it was a win or not, right? Did you, whatever that definition is, right? Let's say in pass blocking, I'm not saying that's what it is, but let's say, hey, you blocked them for 2.5 seconds, right? That's a win. And that's not, we don't know what PFF's metric is. So I think that's something that I think needs to become public to at least help us understand, who's right and who's wrong. But right now, I wouldn't trust anything coming out of PFF. I have no idea. I'm not saying they're wrong. I just don't know what it is. And I think anyone following the NFL, it's time to maybe slide out the PFF evaluations for a little bit as we maybe get some more competition in the space in terms of analytics and evaluating player performance. All right, next report here. Again, this is sort of circling back to what I was talking about earlier. This is according to John Machota. Cowboys honor Jerry Jones on 105.3 The Fan. I really like our coaching staff. They're really outstanding teachers. They know what they're doing. It doesn't look that way now. Chicago had something to do with that, but I've got real confidence in the staff that we've got. All right, so this is Jerry Jones again. This is what Jerry Jones normally says. Listen, I like our guys. We love our guys. Our guys are great. Our guys are awesome. I have confidence, full confidence in the world, right? He said this about Mike McCarthy. He said this about a bunch of players and coaches that they later moved on from, right? So it's one of those things where, when you look at what he said in the two prior reports that I highlighted, I think this is sort of his standby, his PR, his sort of, how he traditionally likes to speak and go into the media. But I think the first two reports are actually what he's feeling and what he's trying to work with the coaching staff, or what he's hearing from the coaching staff, what he's hearing from Schottenheimer, to be honest. Because Schottenheimer and him meet, right? They talk and go over these kind of things. I think we're seeing massive changes. And I think there's a lot of frustration right now from Schottenheimer to the defensive personnel and to the defensive coaching staff, right? We saw that yesterday, and we're seeing that bubbling over with Jerry Jones's comments. Jerry Jones kind of tries to couch it here and say, listen, they're great teachers. You notice that word teachers? He didn't say, they're great strategists or they're great technicians, or they're really smart, or they're really talented, right? They just said they're really good teachers, right? And I think that's an interesting thing and an interesting way to frame it right now, because it's more like he's saying, listen, if you guys pick the right players, and if you had the right scheme, you'd be fine, because you're great at teaching players. You're great at teaching them how to play. You just need to teach them the right thing, right? You kind of. I know we're reading between the lines here, but that's the vibe I get when you look at the other report. If you play the right players, if you have the right students, and you have the right curriculum, you'll be able to teach them. I think that's the vibe I'm getting here from Jerry Jones, especially when you look at the other two reports. And I do think this is a call out to the coaching staff. Very early in the season, it's very, very strange to see this, but actually appreciate it, because it's actually a recognition. And this is one of these new leaves the Cowboys have turned over. I think this offseason and this season so far, as rough as it's been up to this point, it's been obviously very rough defensively. Is that they're actually having some sense of urgency with how they're approaching situations, right? You saw 2020 and last year, there was no sense of urgency whatsoever across the board. It was very, very, very frustrating, because it was like, listen, we're 3-7. Maybe we can turn the sucker around. We don't need to make wholesale changes. Dak Prescott, his hamstrings torn off the bone. We're fine, right? It's one of these things where it's like, what are you talking about? It's obviously not fine. It's a dumpster fire. And I think we're seeing, after this 3-game start, a little bit of urgency, at least a whole lot more than we've seen in years past from the Cowboys. And it's a welcome sign, at least to me. All right, next report here. This is courtesy of Bleacher Report. This is something that made the rounds on social media and on regular media, and I thought it was kind of hilarious. Jerry Jones says the Cowboys will not be doing a tribute for Micah in his return to Dallas on Sunday. He said it's not appropriate, which, of course, it's not appropriate, right? This isn't DeMarcus Ware who played for the Cowboys for, a decade, and, just left because of a salary cap casualty at the end of his career to go chase a ring. Micah Parsons requested a trade. Micah Parsons turned down reportedly $40 million a year, right? I mean, Micah Parsons has played for the Dallas Cowboys for 4 seasons, 2021 through 2024, right? Do you think the Dallas Cowboys, if T.O. ever came back, I don't think he ever did after he left Dallas, do you think they would welcome him back with a tribute? Of course not. Anyone who thinks there should be a tribute to Micah Parsons hasn't watched the Dallas Cowboys for the past 4 years. Parsons is a great player. It was a great player for Dallas, undeniably so. Just like T.O. was a great player for Dallas, undeniably so. But he's not a franchise cultural figure, right? He didn't win you a championship. He didn't carry you over the finish line. He didn't take you to the promised land. I mean, look, he was a really good player. Don't get me wrong, but one playoff game his entire tenure in Dallas. I'm not saying he's the reason they only won one playoff game, but still, there's this weird thing in the media right now, and I really don't get it because it's so obvious to anyone watching it who has two brain cells to rub together. It's like, okay, they are trying to overinflate Micah Parsons, who's a great player, but literally I can't turn on TV with someone saying, "Listen, Micah Parsons is great. Micah Parsons is amazing, and he's a good player, and he'll probably have a great game against Dallas. I'm sure he will. He'll be certainly motivated, but he's got a sack and a half through 3 games." Right. I mean, look, yes, I get it. His advanced analytics are great. He's a very good pass rusher. I understand. He always was that way. But we're talking about a guy that's a sack and a half through 3 games, and we're treating him like he has 8 sacks through 3 games and has already won 2 Super Bowls. What is going on? This is so bizarre. And it goes back to this massive anti-Cowboy just media attack that constantly happens. It's very bizarre to me because to me, and I try and be as unbiased as possible, even though of course I do have my biases. I'm like, this is so everyone should be able to see right through this, right? There's no way he should get any sort of, tribute or anything like that. Absolutely none. He's like they're treating it like when Tom Brady returned to Foxborough. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like when you like listen, I've got my wife's family is from Massachusetts, so when I go up to visit, you drive around during the Brady Belichick eras, and there'd be just Brady just worship all over the place. There'd be like goats. They literally have goats, like pictures and toy goats all over the place as a homage to Brady. When he left, that hurt them. Like viscerally hurt them at a level some people up there in Massachusetts and New England will not recover. Completely different with Micah Parsons. It's so bizarre that the media is treating Parsons as if he's the greatest defensive player in NFL history when he's not even the best at his position in the NFL right now. Very bizarre. All right, moving on to our final report today, just highlighting something that was discussed yesterday, but some more good news, at least trending in a good direction from Todd Archer, Cowboys beat reporter per ESPN. He says some optimism for Jerron Bland from Jerry Jones. He says, I don't want to get over skis here, but it's a good possibility we'll have him. Bland has missed the last 2 games. Yeah, it's pretty much the exact same thing that Schottenheimer said. Listen, he's trending in the right direction. He'll be at practice this week to evaluate him. Yeah, so it's going to be one of those things that whether he can play or not, it's going to be huge. Obviously, I think there's been a lot of people breaking down the film, a lot of people, social media people looking at it. And from what I've been hearing, and I looked at some of the data myself, and I'm not a DB expert, but I kind of glanced at some of it, just try and get a guess what's going on. And what's interesting is that Diggs, as bad as Diggs has played, he had 2 really good tackles and gave up 1 completion. He was targeted twice. Was essentially, after that 1 touchdown, he wasn't targeted the rest of the game. They were not throwing at him at all. It was not a good game from Diggs, obviously, when you look at giving up a slipping and falling, giving up a 40-yard touchdown on 3rd down. I mean, listen, if you got to make up for that, like an interception or a forced fumble or something like that, but it wasn't like a disaster from Diggs. It was a disaster from Kyer Elam. He has really struggled. And of course, Malik Hooker had his worst game of the year as well. Like, I think one of the things that happened is that the Cowboys trying to take some of the load off of Donovan Wilson against Chicago, put a little bit more on Malik Hooker, and he just didn't make a play. I mean, I understand there may have been some communication issues, and I don't know the calls and things like that, so I'm not trying to blame Hooker too much. Elam played very poorly. I think over the course of the game that became very obvious. It was a tough situation, but it's very clear that Kyer Elam, and look, he was not brought into Dallas to be a starting corner to have to cover and be in tough situations. He was brought into Dallas to be a depth piece, right? Let's be honest, right? If you look at the Cowboys structure and strategy, they're like, all right, listen, we're going to have, for medium to long term, the plan is to have Diggs, Bland, and then maybe Revel and Elam and maybe Carson and Butler will duke it out for the number 3 spot. If not, Elam's more of an outside corner anyway, so he's probably going to be a backup, and we're going to let, maybe in some situations Elam plays and things like that. But he was never supposed to be a key starting element to this defense. Never was supposed to even come close to that. So I think he's had an opportunity, and he has not stepped up at all. He's really struggled. And I feel bad for him, unfortunately, because I was hoping, as a lot of people were, that he could get a turnaround with a new leaf in Dallas. Hasn't happened at all. But listen, I mean, Diggs, one completion, and it was a big one, but only two targets, a couple of good tackles. It was not as bad a game against Chicago as it felt very early on for Trayvon Diggs. You have Deron Bland into the fold just to move off of Elam to Deron Bland. That in by itself is absolutely massive. And then you factor in Jadeveon Clowney. If Bland can play, here's the interesting thing for the game against the Packers coming up. If Bland can play, it'll actually be the best defensive roster the Cowboys have had through 4 weeks. Now, it doesn't mean they'll play the best defense because it's a good offense they'll play, so it could still be a disaster, right? I'll throw that out there, of course. But I do think, again, one of the things I've said a bunch of times, September is going to be rough, and it's been much rougher than even I imagined. But as people start coming into the fold, you have Jadeveon Clowney added to the roster, should help a little bit at least, hopefully. Deron Bland coming back from the injury, Revel eventually coming back, right? Closer to Oberstrom coming back. Hopefully this defense figures out what personnel and scheme they need to use, right? It's going to be one of those things where I'm hopeful and optimistic that by the second half of the season, they can start playing better football. Now, unfortunately, the reality is, look, it's with the injuries and their schedule, it's just going to be a tough year. That's just the way I think it's going to go. But I think if they can weather the storm and just find a way to improve and get better and get people back, I think they can start playing better, at least defensively, while they keep working on their offensive identity. All right, let's get into the comments from yesterday. A lot of great comments, of course, as we always get. But we're always going to start with the member comments because I really appreciate you members for everything you do supporting me on the channel. If you want to make sure your comment is always heard, and I will shout out every member comment on the previous day's episode every single time without fail. That is my guarantee. Make sure you become a member. There's a link in the description box below. I really appreciate all of our members. So without further ado, let's get started to a member response to a non-member comment. Love to see this. So we had a non-member comment, why do I care about how bad other teams are? I'm a Cowboys fan for over 50 years, and the Bengals running back doing bad has no correlation. This is in response to me bringing up the fact that the Bengals have rushing yards before contact in the negative through 3 games, like negative 57 rushing yards through 3 games with their starting running back Chase Brown on 47 carries, basically alluding to the fact that the Bengals, we talk about how bad Dallas has been defensively, the Bengals running game, run blocking, run game in general is at that same level of bad, maybe even worse. I mean, negative yards before contact is bonkers. Then Jamal Haltom, a commenter, a member, said, he commented back, Jamal Haltom 5712 commented, I think he is saying that September football is messy all over the NFL, and while we may wallow, it's just the business. Yes. And one of the things with the Cowboys, if the Cowboys play poorly, even if the Cowboys play well, but if the Cowboys play poorly, you're going to hear about it on every single social media. I open up my X feed to try and find news and find these articles and stuff like that. And it's 5 million. It's every single show. It's every single personality in the world. People I haven't heard of for years are now doing like breakdowns of the Cowboys, and they're saying the Cowboys are the worst defense ever. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. They're not the worst defense actually in the NFL right now. I mean, they might end up that way. I mean, they're not training in a good spot. But they were bad last year. They were bad in 2020. They were historically in 2013, right? As much passing yards that they've given up to this point, it's not like that's the most through NFL history through 3 games, right? It's just a weird world we live in right now with just the way the Cowboys work, where everyone has to talk about the Cowboys. Even if they're playing well, you want to talk about how bad the Cowboys are. It's just a weird way. It's just how it works. As a fan, don't fall into the trap. Don't watch ESPN or Fox Sports or go on social media for whether it's good people or bad people to talk about the Dallas Cowboys because they are incentivized to destroy them. That's what their goal. They get clicks. 31 other teams want to hear about how bad the Cowboys are, and half the Cowboys fans want to hear about how bad the Cowboys are for some kind of weird reason, some masochistic reason. I don't know. The reality is, if you're looking for good insights, looking for the reality, don't do it. There are people out there on ESPN right now saying the Cowboys' run defense sucks. He said that yesterday. The Cowboys' run defense has been above average. It's been top 10 in yards per carry allowed. It's been middle of the pack in total rushing yards, and that's with Jalen Hurts with a lot of scrambling yards as well. You look at Russell Wilson, had some scrambling yards too, right? Caleb Williams had some scrambling yards. So if you remove quarterback rushing yards, this run defense has been really good. It's a top 10 run defense in the NFL right now. That's a fact. That's what the numbers say. And that's what the performance. If you watch the games, you get that same vibe too. But if you turn on ESPN, they'll tell you how bad the run defense is. Why? Because they're just trying to bash the Cowboys however they can for clicks. Don't follow for it. Don't wallow in it. The defense stinks in terms of pass defense and pass rush. We know that. That's obvious. But don't just look at ESPN or look at Fox Sports or spend time on social media and just wallow in this decaying filth of thinking the Cowboys are the worst thing that's ever happened. There are other teams in the NFL that are doing just as bad, if not worse, in the similar kind of categories or different categories. There are defenses in the NFL that are worse than Dallas right now. I'll give you an example. The Baltimore Ravens are one of the best teams in football. They've been that way for the past half decade or so. You go on Ravens social media and Ravens fans right now, and they won't shut up about how disastrously bad their defense is. They're calling the defense the worst defense in football. They're talking about firing their defensive coach or saying we're going to have to wholesale the entire defense in the offseason, right? They are beyond frustrated. No one is talking about it in the media. Why? Because they're not the Cowboys. That's the reality. Understand that there are 32, 31 other NFL teams, 32 total, that are going through their own things right now too. It's September, it's October. In just about a week, it'll be October. It's going to be ugly football. And guess what? When we get in November, December, and January, there's going to be a lot of injuries and a lot of teams that have kind of punted on the season. Remember Dallas at the end of last season with no Cooper Rush, no CeeDee Lamb, no DeMarcus Lawrence by the end of the year. Like no Trayvon Diggs, no Overshawn, right? It becomes, and there's a lot of other teams that get injured too, of course. It becomes an interesting hodgepodge of players playing the final month of the season. It's just the way the business is, guys. Don't wallow in it. Good response from Jamal, by the way. Really, really good response. All right, this next comment is from David Dobbins, 5887. He said, brand new defensive coach and scheme added to 13 plus starters and or rotation players missing all or significant playing time. Unrealistic to expect success in 3 games. Quarterback 1-2 injured and should never been played with Diggs. I think he definitely, he came back to his credit, but he's definitely had some issues recovering from the injury. Cornerback 2 is out, talking about Deron Bland. Cornerback 3 is out. Whether you think that's Revel or whether you think that's Butler, I think that's fair, or Kalen Carson, I think that's fair. Cornerback 4 starting, there's Elam, and then you have 5 and 6, which is, again, either, depending how you grade it, either Carson or Revel. And you have cornerback 7 or 8, 9 starting. Yeah, you have guys like Reddy Stewart, who is basically a post-training camp addition, essentially a practice squad call-up, who's starting and playing a lot of reps. You have Bridges starting and playing a lot of reps, or he's not starting, but he's playing a lot of reps, right? Not an ideal situation. He says, gee, I wonder why our secondary sucks. New coach 2, 3 games in, and Santa hasn't shown up. He says, edit, switch Mozzie Smith to offensive guard. He's never going to be a defensive tackle, and he's here for 2 years on the cheap, and he has bigger arms than Larry Allen. Just saying, can't hurt. Yeah, I don't know if switching him is his position, but yeah, Mozzie Smith, he's one of these guys that, it's just tough for him. I feel bad for the guy. Look, I was a bust in college. I played college football, and I wasn't like a huge recruiter or anything like that, but I did not have a good college career. And so I empathize with Mozzie Smith, right? Obviously different sort of situation, of course, but I understand what it's like to be good at one level and go up to the next level and be quite not so good. And I feel bad for Mozzie Smith because I've been in his shoes, at least when I played college football. But you bring up a great point, and this is something in terms of the secondary where it's, if you're Eberflus, and there's a lot of criticism of Eberflus, and rightly so in some regards, but he came into this job and came into training camp, right, with the mindset, okay, this defense will eventually be Diggs and Bland as my 2 outside corners. I'm going to have Micah Parsons as my edge rusher, and I'm just going to have to weather the storm until Overshown gets back from injury, right? And I'm going to have to come up with a scheme to stop the run, right? That was his mindset all training camp. And then right before the season, oh, by the way, now your Micah Parsons is gone. Deron Bland is hurt after week 1. You've got injuries at cornerback position. Kalen Carson and Butler are taking, not taking too much longer than you thought, but they're taking some time. And listen, Revel's going to come back after week 4. And by the way, we have Kenny Clark. So now you're better at stopping the run inside, but your entire scheme and strategy that you worked on all offseason, now you got to change it up completely because now you have to scheme to stop the pass. And it just, I think it's one of those things where when you factor in all of that and you factor in all the different injuries and the new people and all, you run into some problems. Now, there is a talent deficiency for sure. But then again, imagine if Overshown was playing. We'd be, and he was healthy, of course, and he was back to his old speed. It'd be a different defense, of course. Imagine if Bland and Diggs, were playing. It'd be a different defense. Now, injuries happen. That's no excuse. But the reality is the Cowboys don't just have injuries at corner. They have injuries and depth injuries, right? And that's one of the real problems right now. Is normally when teams have injuries, they say, oh, listen, we got to play our number 2 corner, right? We got to play our depth guy. The Cowboys have been forced to basically start guys coming off the practice squad. And look, we saw it last year, and other teams go through it. Usually teams go through it over the course of the long season. The Cowboys getting their depth hit early defensively. They're starting to get some guys back defensively and will in short order. In the meantime, they'll have depth issues depth will be challenged on offense, although I trust the offensive depth a little bit more than the defensive depth. at this point, at least on paper. We'll see how they do against the Packers and going forward. But you do bring up a fair point. It's not an excuse for Eberflus. It's been horrific execution. It's not an excuse for the players. It's been horrific execution. But there are at least some extenuating circumstances to remember. All right, this next comment also from Jamal Haltom, 5712. He said, I like watching the Lions because it gives me hope for a true rebuild that they used to be putrid on defense, particularly in zone, and now with continuity of a few years, they run them perfectly. We just have to stay the course and get the horses and system in place. That's a very good point. If you look at historically, I mean, do you get the Cowboys dynasty without 3-13 and 88 and 1-15 and 89 and then 7-9 and 90? No, you don't. Do you get the Detroit Lions playing really good football now without 3-13 and 1, I think, in 2021, Dan Quinn's first year? Do you get what we see now? No, you do not. Right? If you look at, you get Ezekiel Elliott without going 4-12 in 2015. You don't get Dak Prescott either, for that matter. No, you do not, right? It's just, you get Micah Parsons without going 6-10 in 2020. No, you don't, right? It's one of those things where, and I know a lot of people said, well, we went 7-10 last year. I understand, but this roster had been so depleted and just so worn down. Part of Mike McCarthy's success was a weird combination of the veterans from the Garrett regime, like the offensive line, like the Zach Martins of the world, the Smiths of the world, and of course, Dak Prescott, Tony Pollard, all those guys, and then a lot of new guys that were added, but they didn't have anyone replace those old guys. That never happened. They didn't have anyone yet, and now they're starting to go through that process, right? Booker, Martin, Guyton replacing Smith. Right, they trying to figure out the running back room. You look at receiver, CeeDee Lamb and stuff, but they never got that number 2. Right, they always had that number 2. They had they may have had Amari Cooper or Des Bryant and CeeDee Lamb. They may have had Des Bryant and Cole Beasley. Excuse me, sorry. You may have had Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb. And last year it was just CeeDee Lamb. That's it. And now you have George Pickens into the mix. Okay, now you feel like you have a little bit of a strategy, a little bit of a plan, but now you don't have any continuity. I think one of the failures of this Cowboys staff, if I'm being totally honest, prior to the Schottenheimer regime, was they didn't have any sort of forward-thinking plan in the 2021, 22, 2023 timeframe because they were winning so much. They said, we're just going to stay the course, right? 3 straight 12-win seasons. And I think that was the frustrating thing for the Cowboys front office. I bet they knew they probably, in terms of the smart people in the Cowboys front office, like Will McClay, for example, I bet they knew they probably weren't quite as good as their record was, at least in 2023 and going into 2024. But they're like, we can't upset the apple cart too much because we're winning a lot of games. What are we going to, imagine if we completely upset this, what we're doing, 3 straight 12-win seasons. We cannot possibly completely retool what we're doing. And at the same time, because they were winning, they got later draft picks, right? They were late on the waiver wire, right? They didn't have a lot of cap space that they used effectively. So it became one of these weird worlds where they were winning, but they weren't good enough to actually win for a championship. And because they were winning, they weren't getting the opportunities to refill their talent to make them better. And now we're seeing the effects of it now, where they're just beat up in some areas, but they're also talent deficient, certainly on defense. And look, it happens to teams, right? It's sort of what happens. It's happening to the Kansas City Chiefs, by the way, right? Listen, I think the Chiefs are still a feisty football team, and they've got good players. But you look at their offense in terms of what they used to be, and it's just not nearly as good, not nearly as explosive. And part of the reason why is because they're always drafting at the end of the first round. Right, the Cowboys had 3 straight seasons where they drafted, 12-win seasons, drafted in the bottom quarter of the first round, and every round that follows. NFL's a parity business. The Cowboys did not have the pipeline of good picks to backfill the talent as it got older, right? They did their best, but the reality is Guyton isn't as good as Tyron Smith, obviously, right? And that's a deficiency, right? In 2021, 2022, 2023, they had Tyron Smith. In 2025, they've got Guyton playing better, but nowhere near Tyron Smith, right? In 2021, 22, they had Tony Pollard, Ezekiel Elliott. Right now, they don't have it. 2021, 22, you had Amari Cooper in 21 with CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup. In 22, you had CeeDee Lamb, and then eventually Michael Gallup returned to the fold, right? It became one of those things that eventually they ran out of guys, right? We saw that last year. Jalen Tolbert, once CeeDee Lamb was out, Jalen Tolbert was your number 1 receiver, right? That's a problem. And I think right now the Cowboys are feeling the effects of that. And they made some moves this offseason to kind of slowly rebuild and retool and figure things out. But this is why they traded Parsons away. They needed a lot of picks. They need a lot of cap space because they got to fill out this roster with B-plus players. And they've got a good chunk of them, but they've got, for every B player, they've got an F player. And that's a real problem with their talent right now. All right, let's see. Do we have time for some non-member comments? We certainly do. Let's pull some up here. All right, let's try and go through some. I'm gonna turn some really good ones. Here we go. This is from Amir Haddad, 9588. He says Cowboys have the worst DBs in the NFL, especially safety position. They need to draft at least two safeties to replace Wilson and Hooker. Trade Diggs. He was not such a great corner from the beginning. He's too weak and lost his skill set after his injury. However, replace the entire DB room except Deron Bland. Yeah, I think there definitely is some issues there. Safety position definitely needs to get better. Undeniably so. I would argue linebacker also needs to get better, although Overshown returning would be and being healthy would be a great sign for that. I'm disappointed in Diggs, but maybe he can turn around. Maybe he get more reps. We'll see him over the course of the season. Look, and one of the reasons you have the first round picks, right? So you have two first round picks. You get Kenny Clark to help defensive tackle. Now you got two first rounders. So maybe next, right, two more first rounders. So maybe next year in the first round, you go safety and defensive end, right? For example. And so as opposed to if you had kept Parsons and maybe you go 9-8 this year, then next year you're like stuck. Okay, well, we have to just pick safety, and then we just hope that works. And then you're still next year you're going to have only one first round pick. So now the Cowboys at least have a path forward and some cap space too. So it's clear the Cowboys, at least from a front office perspective, with the Micah Parsons trade, I don't think they're surprised by any of this. I think they saw the roster. They knew the roster. The coaches aren't dumb. They know what they have. And I think trading away Parsons and getting the cap space and the draft capital, and of course Kenny Clark, I think it was all part of the reality of this roster just has too many flaws. I don't disagree that the safety position is awful. I think pretty much everyone would agree with you at this point. Let's see here if I'm trying to find someone I normally don't respond to. Let's see here. Well, here's a regular commenter. This is from Stephen Vanover. He says, big changes, a rare disagreement, if I may. First is the definition of big, i.e. Murray, Solomon Thomas, letting a veteran on his last legs walk like Lawrence and other examples you gave. I would not call it anywhere near big, nor do I believe you will upon reflection. Parsons was indeed a big move. However, it was driven by JJ's ego rather than a desire for change. The Spence reasoning were all after the fact. Hiring Shoddy, another ego decision after being outmaneuvered by other teams and getting this season's sexy hires proof. Shoddy was his last choice when the shelf was bare of options. Pickens, Jerry has been doing wide receiver for splash trades for a year. Thank you, Randy Moss Williams, a running back with limited options that is working out great, but not a change. So yeah, change happened, but it wasn't the intended result. It was a side effect. This is the exact opposite of someone being brave enough to enact change. Jerry is strong enough to survive it, which is not the same thing as often conflated. As you mentioned in your wrap, the Cowboys have made quite a few solid, smaller moves, not changes. As always, love the content. Great injury take. Keep them coming. Yeah, I guess you could look at it that way. I think the Parsons trade, I think the negotiation, I don't disagree with the negotiation issues being because of Jerry Jones. That I think is true. I think that's undeniably true. But I think the willingness to trade him and for what they traded him for, I think that was a big move, for a forward-thinking move, right? I think you can sit there and kind of separate the two here and say the Parsons negotiation drama heavily of Jerry Jones, right? Obviously, it takes two to tango, of course. Parsons and his team had his issues. Jerry Jones and his group had his issues. But I think the negotiation thing, that for sure had a big part to do with Jerry Jones's ego, undeniably so. But I think trading him and willing to trade him for what they got, I think that was the part of the making a big change in terms of how they see their franchise going forward, right? If they would have just traded him for, I mean, I don't want to say nothing, but if they would have traded him for veteran players, let's say if they would have traded him to the Packers for Kenny Clark, Josh Jacobs, their running back, and I don't know, give me a random corner, right? Hobbs, right? Then I would have said, okay, then that's sort of not a great long term. That's not a change in thinking. That's not a change in strategy. You just went short termerism with Micah Parsons and went short termerism with just three other players that you hope can add up to be more than Micah Parsons. Right, the Cowboys instead, they traded Micah Parsons, got one player, and they got two draft picks and a lot of draft capital. Again, that's more a salary cap space, excuse me. That's forward thinking. That's a big change. Pickens, yeah, he's made big splash trades before in the past, but when's the last time they made one? Right, in terms of big. I mean, they made Amari Cooper in 2018. They did Roy Williams, I think, in 2000. Help me out here. 2008? Something. I want to say 2008. Somewhere around that time frame. So, I mean, they haven't made a big splash trade for a wide receiver in, if we go back to 2018, we're talking 7 seasons, 7 years, right? 6.5 years if you're being really specific because the Cooper trade happened mid-season. That's a long time, right? So, again, I think a big trade, they went 6.5 years with no big trades. I mean, listen, there you go. That's a change, right? I would say 4 or 5 years is a change. I mean, that's a long time, especially in National Football League. And I know some of the smaller moves, obviously the Murray move and the Thomas move, those aren't huge. But across the board, I think they've been making some clear changes in terms of strategy and approach, and I think that's undeniable. Whether it will work out or not, we'll have to see, of course. But I do think there have been making clear changes this offseason. Even the Schottenheimer hire, right? People sit there and say, well, they wanted they fell short on the sexier hires. There were reports they didn't even care about Ben Johnson, right? The Lions. They weren't even talking to Aaron Glenn, right? Who got hired by the New York Jets, right? For example, those were two of the big name, more sexy hires, like you alluded to. I think they wanted a cultural change. I think they wanted to have a change in how they play the game. They wanted to become a power football team. They wanted to stop the run, right? That's at least what Schottenheimer has said. And I'm assuming he's saying publicly what he told Jerry Jones privately in their interview. So look, the Cowboys have become a power football team overnight. They haven't been a power football team since 2018, I don't think. And you can make an argument, maybe not even then. Even when they were running for the football well in 2021 and 2022, it was much more a big and splash play. It wasn't as physical as we're seeing right now with the Cowboys. Again, a massive strategic change. So I think there have been big changes. It may not be enough to people's likings, and because Jerry Jones is still running the show, it may still feel too much like the old regime. In a lot of ways, it still is. But it's undeniable to sit there and say, over the past 9 calendar months at this point, there's been massive changes from where the Cowboys were in 2023 and 2024 to where they are today and where they're going in the future. All right, let's see if we can find one more comment here. This is from Plague Doctor. He said, run defense is about team discipline and communication, not relying on run stuffing defensive ends, because stopping the run requires all 11 players staying in their lanes, knowing their assignments, unlike pass defense, which often comes down to individual matchups. That's not untrue, although I would argue in pass defense you do need communication as well if you're playing zone, as the Cowboys have accurately demonstrated they cannot do that very well, at least through 3 games. The Cowboys lacked that discipline and communication for years, very true, but penalties being down along with other metrics show a more disciplined approach, which we needed. Under Schottenheimer, the offense feels more in control, whereas it always felt like anything could happen under McCarthy. The run defense has improved, and while the wheels can always fall off, the current direction is encouraging. Yeah, it's one of those things where the Cowboys came into the season, and it was with the Schottenheimer, the new staff, they had 3 goals. 1, become a physical football team and run the football. 2, become more disciplined and more buttoned up. 3, get better at stopping the run. They've accomplished those 3 goals. The problem is they've sacrificed with just a weird, again, the NFL is weird, the worst pass defense right now in the National Football League, and a lot of big-time, big plays surrendered. So it's just one of those things. But if you look at if you would have told a Cowboys fan back in February and said, listen, the Cowboys are going to be in the top half of stopping the run, they're going to be a top 10 rushing team, and they're going to be better in terms of penalties and discipline. You would have said, great job, Schottenheimer. Give him the coach of the year already, right? He's already better than McCarthy. It's just because there's been such the defensive issues in the pass rush and pass coverage, it kind of has obfuscated some of the positives. And you do bring up a great point. Again, the trend is encouraging in terms of what the Cowboys are doing. Hey, look, even if you look at the roster right now, Javonte Williams, is he the long-term answer at running back? Probably not, right? But they're still running the football and being a physical football team. Miles Sanders certainly is, and they're still running the football with him. Right, you look at defensive in terms of stopping the run, right? Their linebackers play a big role in stopping the run, of course. Does anyone believe Murray and Sanborn are long-term answers? Absolutely not. They were short-term, sort of plug-and-play veteran guys that Eberflus could trust. Neither of them are long-term answers, right? They just aren't. We all know that, right? We know Overshown hopefully will be one, and maybe a guy like Shamar James or Leofau will be one, and probably a different veteran or a draft pick will be another one going forward, right? That's the long-term answer. So even in the areas they've improved on, they're doing it with a lot of short-term gaps. They haven't actually even accelerated their top-flight talent in those departments yet. So I think the trend in those directions is encouraging. But the talent deficiency and the horrible execution on defense in terms of the pass rush and the secondary has kind of covered up some of those positives. But if you just focused on those 3 things, which were big glaring issues under Mike McCarthy, and you bring up a great point. I can't tell you how many times going into a game with McCarthy, even when Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator, where it was just like the game plan seems to be overwhelm the opposition with talent. And listen, that's how you beat bad teams 40-10 if you're a good team, right? You're just going to be, we're just going to overwhelm them because we're just going to be aggressive and just completely eviscerate them. But when you play good teams, suddenly that talent deficiency in terms of the opposition doesn't show up. Suddenly it's a lot harder. How do you survive, right? And that's how you score 17 points and then against San Francisco one year and 12 points the following year in the postseason, because you couldn't overwhelm them with talent, right? And I think that was a huge problem with the Dallas Cowboys. It really went back to the Jason Garrett era, right? They tried to overwhelm people. 2019, very similar, right? They were a good team, not a great team, but a good team that overwhelmed the bad teams, but in big games against good opponents, they couldn't get it done. And that was just the reality. Schottenheimer, again, different than McCarthy, different than the second half of Jason Garrett right now, or maybe the whole time Jason Garrett, that he is preparing this team with a system and process that is much more, it's more about execution instead of overwhelming, right? In terms of what they're doing offensively and being physical. And I think that's a good sign. Stopping the run, great. Discipline up to this point has been fine. I think, again, a lot of that's covered up by the defensive issues. But in terms of the three key areas of weakness the Cowboys have had over the past few seasons, Schottenheimer and his staff have come in and through 3 games fixed all 3 of them. And that's commendable. And don't lose sight of that. I think it's an important fact. That's an important fact going forward. All right. Wow, the show ended up being longer than normal. Jeez. I tell you what, you guys have great comments, man. I need to make a bigger effort to respond to more comments and get through the stories quicker, I think. I mean, there's some days where there's a lot of news, but boy, you guys have such good comments. I love responding with what you guys have to say, so keep them coming. I don't know what I'm going to have to do with all these comments. I don't know if I should make this show longer. Is 40 minutes too long? 50 minutes now? Is that too long? Or should I keep going with comments? Let me know. Let me know in the comment section, right? Keep commenting to see if you need to see more comments. But all right, I'll be back in my regular digs tomorrow, so good to see you guys in a more professional sound environment. We'll see what the Cowboys do as they get ready, of course, for the Week 4 opponent. But until then, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.